5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're good. You're lucky you got 5 minutes, people. Come on. All right. So we talked a little about this in session 1, but I just want to refresh your memory, right? So what does it look like in the classroom for kids who've had trauma? Now, I am aware that we have people here who work with little itty bitties, and we have people who work with little itty bitties and big bodies. Okay? And so I'm very aware we have a whole gamut. All right? So let's make sure everyone's aware. How many people work 0 to 4, 0 to 5? Okay? How many people work primary, elementary? All right? How many people work high school? All right? How many people work college? Good job. Good job. I knew that was coming. All right? So what I'm talking about today applies across the spectrum. Have we gotten that piece yet? So while I might talk about itty bitties, this applies to older people. I've done this work and applied it with people who are 80. I've done this work and applied it to people who are 50. I've done this work and applied it to teenagers. All right? The biggest thing is you have to connect, build a relationship, create safety, right? Connect, and get to know your people. And find out what they need. But all these strategies can be utilized in some way across the lifespan. They apply to people who have trauma. We all have a brain. It develops relatively similarly. Now, it depends on our environment, right? But it develops in the order, okay? So it doesn't matter skin color, it doesn't matter gender. It's important to remember that these can be applicable, okay? All right. Now, I recognize that there are some gender issues. I also recognize there are cultural issues. Like, I'm not saying that those aren't important to consider, but I'm saying that while I might talk about children, I mean children of all ages, children and youth. Okay, so in the classroom, behaviors can look all sorts of different ways. How many of you have had children of all ages who have a heart rate increase? Okay, so for those of you who weren't in the first session or haven't heard, I'm a big fan of heart rates. We talked a lot about that. Taking a heart rate. That might even be a good way to check in the morning at the beginning of your classes. And doesn't mean you have to do that. Once you do this a couple times, you can just have people check their heart rate. Maybe they write it down. Maybe you map it out. That's teaching people about their body. It is so empowering for kids to learn about their body. Because right now I'm at 77. That's actually pretty low for when I present. I'm usually much higher. When I can teach a kiddo that their heart rate is at 100, they need to do some self-care to lower that, I'm giving them a life skill. I'm giving them a way to interpret how they're feeling. Some kids will tell you, I just don't feel right. I just don't feel right. When you can put a number to that, then it teaches them, this is why I don't feel right. My heart's racing, it's about to beat out my chest. Or it's really low. Or my blood sugar's low. Or I need to eat. Or whatever that looks like, okay? How many of you have had kids, okay, who dissociate? Dissociate to checking out. Like they are not present, they are not available. Right? Those are tough kids to engage. How many of you have the flip side? There's extremely aroused, hyper aroused, off the charts. Their feelings are spilling out all over the place. Right? Okay? What about somatic complaints? Oh, I have a headache. You have a headache every single day of every single hour of every single, right? Oh, my knee hurts. Oh, my elbow hurts. Right? I had one kid tell me his hip hurt, which is not a very common kid thing. He was a little guy. He's like, Miss York, my hip hurts. What's going on, buddy? My hip hurts. Do you want to just go say hi to the nurse? I do. Can I just go say hi? That'd be fine. But what does that tell me, right? I mean, what a great, unique way of connection, okay? Lack of self-regulation. Now, I'm going to ask you how many kids do you have that cannot self-regulate? Lots? Okay, how many have at least one kid in their life? Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. How many of you have adults in your life? Colleagues who cannot self-regulate? All right, this is an important discussion because children who don't know how to self-regulate will co-regulate. They will look to an adult to help them figure out how to soothe whatever's going on. If you are that person who cannot self-regulate, figure it out. Do some of this stuff to help you out because somebody is looking to you to co-regulate. That's really normal, right? Infants cry, we respond. Cry, respond. Cry, respond. They calm down when we are calm and calming them. Now, for my early childhood people, that happens through the age of 5 into 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? Hopefully, those periods of self-regulation in healthy kids become smaller, like their self-regulation episodes are less frequent, less severe, and shorter in time. I have had many colleagues I've worked with who cannot self-regulate themselves. So how in the world are they going to co-regulate with a kid who's out of control? It's very complicated. How many of the kids that you work with lack empathy? Okay, we talked a little bit about this in session 1, but I'm going to reiterate. I'm a big believer that just because you lack empathy does not mean you have an antisocial personality disorder, especially if you're a child. I cannot care about you if I'm out of control. If I am not okay and people haven't cared about me, I can't care about you. I don't call my infant antisocial because she doesn't care about me and my needs. That would be crazy. But there are many, many children who grow up and they're 15 and 16 and they don't show empathy, and that's what we do is we label them. Now, are there kids who have antisocial personality disorders? Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Of course. But there are many kids who have trauma, who've never had that addressed, that don't show empathy. And that's because they don't feel safe. Okay? How many of you have kids who have peer issues? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. Peer problems is a big deal. I learned how to interact with people based on my attachment figures. While you are all not the parents of the kids in your classroom, you are parenting. You are attaching. And if you don't have a healthy attachment with those children, then they are going to struggle with how to attach to others. And if they have attachment issues in general from their home life, they're going to struggle. Right? How many of you guys have kids with difficult behaviors? I love that, difficult behaviors. What's difficult for one might not be difficult for another. So what does that mean? Let's define that. What is a difficult behavior? Temperamental. You never know where they're going to be, right? Unpredictable. That whole walking on eggshells feeling. We've all had that. Absolutely. Okay?
Violent.
Violent. We're going to spend some time around aggression today. Okay? How many of you have kids who are violent? Right? So, violent kids are scary kids. Violent kids are also scared. Violent kids are also scared. That was a big shift for me when I started doing this work. When I started to see my violent kids as scared kids, their violence went down quite a bit. Because I was no longer walking in all kind of ready to go to fight, right? I was walking in willing to be vulnerable and say, hey buddy, what's going on? What are you scared of? What's happening? What's going on with you? And that shifted things a lot. Okay? What else are difficult behaviors?
There's a child I knew of who she wasn't getting one of her needs met. She was getting bullied in class because and the teacher didn't do anything. This is before she was officially diagnosed with her disorder, and she went in and purposely made a mess of the bathroom that was attached to there. She made a very big mess and had to clean it afterwards. It was a logical consequence. But the teacher wasn't paying attention to her when she was being bullied, and because her clothes that she was wearing were a little small and were showing like her backside, and she reacted. It was a reactionary thing where she went in and she said, okay, you're ignoring me and ignoring my need here. I'm going to act out.
That never happens. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just kidding. Like, kids do that, right? Kids tell us their needs all day long. And sometimes we listen, and sometimes we don't. I think I shared with you guys about the 4-year-old who trashed the office and we were calling the police, right? And that was because he had said, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Just a minute, we're gonna go. Just a minute, we're gonna go. Just a minute, we're gonna go. And pretty soon, the whole entire room was trashed. Like, huge 8-foot bookshelves had been taken over by a little tiny itty bitty guy. And that was because his needs were not met. And he, by all means, I'm gonna tell you what my needs are, right? Okay, what other difficult behaviors?
I have students that runs from school.
Runners, those are fabulous, right? Because the tricky about runners, I mean, and when you think about runners, like let's just walk this through. How old is he?
In high school, sophomore.
Perfect. Because what happens is now I'm leaving a situation that I'm not allowed to leave, and now you have to call everybody and their dog to come out and give me some attention. Hasta la pasta. Right? I mean, that's what happens. So I have a 16-year-old who's a runner, and I mean, inevitably there's 40 people involved every single time. And I'm like, how can we get these 40 people involved before she runs? Like, that would be awesome. Because they're seeking that attention. Sometimes they're also trying to get out of a situation. Sometimes it's too much. It's too vulnerable. It's too connected. Maybe it's too intimate. Maybe they're being held accountable in a way that it's too stressful. So, okay, great example. Tammy?
I have a stepbrother who's rad.
So RAD is reactive attachment disorder, okay?
And whenever she gets mad or doesn't feel like things just aren't right, she'll get scissors and she goes in and she just starts cutting everything of her stepsisters. She's not mad at her, but she cuts. Like she cut up the skirt on her bed, she cut up Kaylee's shirt, and she steals.
Stealing and cutting. So what do you think that's about? What do you think cutting people's stuff up is about?
Maybe she's hurt, she wants them to feel hurt.
Absolutely. Maybe she's hurt, so she wants them to feel hurt. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that drive behavior, right? And without knowing a kid, I can't tell you 100% what that's about. But I definitely think there's some themes that come up. I am hurting, and I want other people to feel this pain with me. Which is one of the reasons it's so important we talk about feelings. And we talk about stuff, right? It's also a way of not being able to deal. Like, I don't know how to deal with this feeling. I've never been taught. I'm a big believer that in this world, we should not go through it without someone to share our pain with us.
And we really, my daughter has done an amazing job with her. And we had her on track, but she wasn't doing that, and I was really impressed with it, talking about feelings, and her biological mom, we called her the egg killer.
Yeah.
She didn't see her for like 2 years, didn't want to have anything to do with her brother, but does favor the brother, and she knows that, so that's one of the big things. Well, then all of a sudden, Mom decided she wanted to be part of his life again, and they went to court. They had to go 1 week with her, and then 1 week with back home. And Allie had gotten her to where she was doing great. After that first week with biological mom, she was back to doing the same stuff.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, because exactly what happened, right? She is re-traumatized. She's re-experiencing all the things, and now biomom is challenging her reality. So over here in this home, I feel safe and comforted, and I'm getting my needs met, but enter person who is responsible, that relationship trauma, so that is back in my life now, and now I'm back over on this side. And that happens more often with these kids than we even know. It happens constantly. And so that relationship trauma is the piece where we come in and we can say, always our relationship is going to be predictable. Always. Because I've done my work, and even if I mess up, which I will, I'm gonna come back to you and I'm gonna apologize and I'm gonna repair that relationship in a healthy way, and you and I are gonna build our trust again. Right?
Yeah, and Allie could get after her for doing something, and she'll still go right back to Allie and do it us and what's Allie. So,
Absolutely. Kids want structure. Kids want people to hold them accountable. Kids need that, right? I tell people all the time, every single person I meet that comes in my door, because people come to me wounded, right? They don't come see me because they're happy. They come to see me because they're wounded. I say, I will never lie to you. I will never lie to you. What we talk about might be really hard. I might have to tell you really terrible things. Like I've had to tell kids, your parent has died, or you'll never be able to see this person again, or your parents are in jail and that's why they're not seeing you, or your dad wrote a letter, we read it, it's not appropriate for you to read. Those are terrible things to have to tell children.
then she goes back to, once she started going back to biological mom, the mom was taking her over to her boyfriend's house. And her boyfriend's taking baths with her and sexually abusing her.
Yep.
The mom knows it.
And hopefully somebody's reporting. Yep, so.
Reported to CPS, and nothing was ever done. Because mom's dad is a state legislature, so we figured there's some connection there. Finally, we got, something happened, I can't remember what it was now, happened, and I said, you go to the restraining order against her. And they did. And they got a judge. They hadn't even done a forensic report. And CPS didn't do anything. And the judge saw the forensic report and mom lost custody.
Good.
So now she lives in fear of seeing mom. Because the last time she saw her, mom asked her, did you talk to CPS again?
No.
And Linda says, no. She says, I can tell the line is favored with no barbecue pork.
Yeah, so we're entering a whole other day of training, right? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of our system issues, is that when we report, nothing gets done. Or when we report, we don't know what's getting done. That's probably a more accurate statement, because I've been on the side of the reporting and what they can do and how limited they are in a lot of things as well. And so what I would say to you all is you need to be documenting any concerns that you have. Document what you're concerned about. Make sure if it's a certain kid, document when you've reported, who you talked to when you reported, and do that every single time, every single time, every single time. And if you're concerned for immediate, danger, call the police immediately. And then you guys, they can sort that all out, right? But you guys are going to be exposed to things that you don't want to be exposed to. You didn't ask for that. You don't want to know that. They'll tell you. When you build a relationship with a child, they're going to tell you things that you really don't want to know. I mean, sometimes you really don't. But once they share it, shareable is bearable, but shareable also might become reportable, right? Shareable might open up a whole other ball of wax, and so you've got to be prepared for that. So I would encourage you, document, but also be discussing in your schools what the proper protocol is, what that looks like. And I'm a big believer that you reach out if they have other agency involvement outside of the school, that you do what you can to get releases so you can talk to the people outside of the school. That happens a lot with me because I'm outside of the educational setting. I always try to work with families to have them sign a release so that I can talk to the people at school. It's always under the surmise that we're working together, right? But then the deeper we get into cases, sometimes or relationships, the school will call me and say, hey, this is what's up, how's this going? And then if a report is made, I have a lot of strong opinions about reporting. And so I am a believer that I tell people when I report. Because my goal is to work with that family through the crisis. Now that's my role. Schools have a lot of different policies around that, so you need to talk to people about what that looks like. But my goal in reporting is not around ripping apart a family, it's around keeping a family safe. And if I can be honest and say, listen, I have to report this. In fact, why don't we report together? What usually happens is trust is built. Because they're knowing, they don't have to wonder who called. Now, there have been 2 or 3 incidents where I've not done that because I've been concerned about the safety of me and my family. So I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to tell anybody. So I think those are things to just be cognizant of and be working on with your family, your teams, and your school about what the proper protocol is. Okay? All right. How many of you have seen decrease in homework completion or getting schoolwork done? Yeah, that's a very common one. Why in the world would I care about my spelling test if I'm worried about whether or not my dad is going to beat my mama? Right? So sometimes we have to get really creative on how to help kids put that aside, those stressors, and I call them, put them in a container. So I've even built containers with kids that say, this is your stress container. Everything that's stressful goes into this container. And then we're going to put it in there. We're going to hold it in there for the day, and then you can move forward with getting your work done. I know it's in there. We might, if we have time, we'll come back and visit it. But there's something, sometimes you want to spend time talking about it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just want to move through it. Right? So it just depends on that kid and that relationship. All right, and how many of you guys have had kids who have lack of focus or concentration? How many of you have kids who are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD that probably are not, probably have trauma instead? Right? Because that's one of the #1 things that we see in children with trauma is lack of focus and attention. And what about increased absences? It's huge, right? How many of you have coworkers who stop coming to work because they're traumatized? So I heard yesterday a statistic, 75% of all adoptive parents are abused by their children at some point. So I think it's important to think about that most of these kids who have trauma, right, if they go into an adoptive home, they're acting out in some way, and they might be abusing their parent. I think educators see that as well. I don't know that it's always as to the extent, because that relationship's not always as intimate, right? But educators get abused as well. Physically abused, verbally abused, we've seen that, okay? All right. We talked a little bit about dissociation, but I want to just spend a little bit of time there. We're getting to strategies, I promise. It's all build up. Okay. Dissociation is really around checking out, okay? And it's around, I am so stressed, my stress response system is shutting down. I cannot even interpret what's happening in my world. We saw that in a video, right? There were 3 kinds of stress response systems. There's the hypersensitive, the hypervigilant, and the shutdown one. We don't spend enough time talking about the shutdown one, and that's why I just wanted to bring it to light a little bit more today. What are some strategies that you're already using to engage that kid who's shut down? Anybody have any brilliant ones? Or maybe you don't know they're brilliant, but you're willing to share.
Take them for a walk.
Take them for a walk, okay?
I actually work at the prison, so I see everyone when we're past all this and things like that. And the main thing that we use is praise. And a lot of these kids have never heard any praise. No one has ever said that you are going to get through education. This is
Great
I
point.
think the power of praise is sometimes forgotten.
It's minimized, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the power of praise, that's a great point. Because when we are being told everything we're doing wrong, and everything that we've been sent the message you're not wanted because we were living in multiple homes, or we've been removed from a home, or maybe my parents have chosen drugs over me, then I haven't heard a lot of praise. Absolutely correct. And in a healthy home, praise starts as soon as you're born. Oh, you're here, good job, you came out okay, we made it. Right? That happens, and then it's like, oh, you're smiling, finally. You're smiling, you're rolling over, you're walking. I mean, healthy kids get all that. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. Kids who are maltreated or they're traumatized, abused, neglected, they don't get that, and you're absolutely right. The more we can praise kids and find the good. So in the military, we do resiliency training, and we call it hunt the good stuff. It's actually my favorite resiliency model. Hunt the good stuff, because if you can really find what's good about a kid, they're going to hear that. Now, if you do that superficially, it ain't going to work. So you need to have a relationship and really be meaningful and sincere in what you're saying, or they're going to be like, yeah, right. Just one more person who's telling me something they don't believe. Okay? So hunting the good stuff.
One thing I do with a lot of these kids, and obviously I get them, they're called sensory kids, but kids what is important to them, then we won't be able to empower them to buy into. And it's not easy. I mean, sometimes we'll just look at you like, what did you just ask me? And I'm like, what do you want to do today? What's important to you today? Because they're just shut down. And so then I will usually, you have to wait, sometimes minutes, sometimes things like hours, but they will come up with something.
Absolutely.
It's a starting point, because they're engaged in it, they're not disengaged.
Absolutely, right? So if you've spent a lot of time in treatment centers, kids have goals every day at treatment centers, right? And I think that they should have goals in school, and they're goals they come up with, right? So today I want to go to recess and I want to get along with my friends without blowing out. Today I'm going to read a book towards my AR goal. Today I'm going to listen to my teacher without them telling me to sit still 17 times. Now, probably they should be able to move around a little bit, but that's okay. So I think, those are things we need to start shifting and thinking, because once we empower them to come up with what they want to achieve and we meet their need, it's what she said in the video was great. They're seen as manipulative, but we as adults are not looking at it from their point of view. Right? We're putting all our agendas on them. Now, most kids love going to school until about the 3rd or 4th grade. So what happens in 3rd or 4th grade that shifts that, and then they're all of a sudden like, I hate school. I hate school, I don't want to be there. Is it the
writing, work, and there's bullying or peer pressure?
It's a lot more of a lot of things, right? But one of the things is they don't move around as much.
That's true.
They don't have as much fun. There's not as much play. It's a lot more serious, right? Well, I don't know about you, but on my list of 5 things that I love to do every day, it's play. Like all of my list involves play and having fun. And I'm an adult, and so that needs to be incorporated as kids get older, right? Like my kids are coming home doing these great projects, and they're dirty and they're messy and they got paint all over their clothes. And then I got clients that are coming in that are 7th, 8th grade, and they're not doing any of that kind of stuff because they got to meet all these standards, which I get the standard part. I'm not minimizing that. But what I'm saying is that we have to meet kids where kids are at if we want them to continue to be successful. And these kids who have trauma, they need even more because they haven't had that. They don't know how to play, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about interventions. The rest of our time together today is all about interventions. And there's going to be 2, oh, go ahead.
One behavior, if you can address at some point, is self-harm.
Okay, yep, self-harm. We'll go there. All right, and as you guys come up with more behaviors that we want to specifically look at, just let me know today, okay? All of our interventions need to be focused on these things. Now this is Bruce Perry's work, okay? And what he's found is that when the brain that's been traumatized develops, there's huge developmental gaps. So you can have 15, 16-year-old bodies with infant needs. That's complex. I prefer the ones that have less gaps. But we do work with ones that don't, right? And we actually see that play out even into adulthood, right? So our interventions need to be relational. They need to be safe relationally. I'm guessing if I asked you right now who's the scariest teacher in your school, you will tell me. There's a scary teacher. There's a teacher that all the kids are scared of. I know who it is in my kid's school. And I guarantee that my child will not have that teacher. Because I want them to be safe. Okay? I don't really think any other kid should have that teacher either. But anyway, moving on. All right, relevant. They need to be developmentally matched. This is sometimes tricky. Because the reality is there are many, many high schoolers who need recess. They need to go play. They need to go and play in the dirt, and they need to swing, and they need to, do all those things. Do the monkey bars 17 times and flip, and they need to go play tackle football. I mean, they need that kind of stuff. Shouldn't just be a class that's required, right? I need that kind of stuff. And it has to be repetitive. It can't be one of these things we tried it 1 or 2 times and it didn't work. And I see that in schools all the time. How many of you have set IEPs, you spent 2 or 3 hours of your life, you're never gonna get back to create a plan you're never gonna do, right? It has to be repetitive and patterned. It has to be rewarding for the kid. You can have all the great ideas in the world, but if the kid doesn't like it, it's not the right idea. I have got a million ideas in my toolbox. I am a very creative person, but what works for one kid does not work for another kid. It has to be rewarding for them. This little baby, when I'm in a healthy relationship with this child, I'm smiling, she's smiling back at me. I'm smiling, she's smiling back at me. And then as kids get older, what do? They touch your face, they pull your hair. They do that because it's rewarding. They like that. We want them to feel that same stuff, okay? It needs to be rhythmic, okay? And it needs to be respectful. It needs to be respectful to the child, the family, and the culture. There are many things that, and by culture, I don't just mean culture as far as race and those kind of things. I mean family culture. My family is a lot different than most families. My family is going to be different than your family and your family and your family. And what works in mine might not work in everybody else's. So whenever I work with families, I say to them, I'm going to have a lot of ideas because that's just who I am. I might tell you something that you're like, Stacy, there's no way in hell we would ever do that. I need to know that. Because if you're like, yes, that's a great idea, and then you leave and you never do it, we're not going to get anywhere. These families are experts on their children, right? Even parents who have traumatized their children are experts on their children. They might have some really good ideas around bedtime or morning rituals. Or you know what, when we sing this song, it really calms my kiddo down. Those are things that we need to know, strategies, okay? So before we even move forward on interventions, you all in this room, there's about 50 of us, I am definitely positive you all have strategies you're already doing that fit this. So we're going to take the next 5 minutes and you're going to chat in your groups about what you do that already works with this. Okay? Ready, set, go. So I've made a request for someone to be typing the strategies that we developed today so that I can give you all a copy of that. Wouldn't that be nice? Right? So thank you to this fine young man over here. So here's the thing. I am a believer that you all are experts. Like, you're here because you care about kids and you're already doing things that are working. And so if we can collectively come together and we can share those experiences and we can apply it to the brain science that we've learned about, aren't we going to be better at what we do? What an enrichment, right? So we're going to type as we go, and I promise that I will get that to you. If you don't get it, you need to email me because something happened. All right, I follow through on my promises. All right, okay, so let's chat. What'd you come up with? What are some strategies that you use for all these things that we listed that have been really helpful, okay?
We take ours off the routine. I mean, that is crucial. So every day when the kids show up, I have from 2nd grade to 4th, and then I have like the middle schoolers. So we start with our stretches, we do the same stretches, and then we sit down. And when I plan the assignment, I try and do like a reading, and then we talk about what we read, how we can compare it to life. But then we do like an art or hands-on type of project. And if they do that good, they know at the end of class we either do like 10 minutes of just dance or a physical activity. But then the last 3 minutes we sit down and calm down to prepare, you know, for the next class. But
perfect. So I have a couple things in there. So one, you have a very predictable schedule, right? How many of you have predictable schedules? Yay for predictability. Okay? When you come from a life of chaos, predictability can be hard, but it's necessary. Okay? You also, it sounds like, have lots of structure around what you're doing. Okay? So it's predictable what you're going to do, but you give lots of direction and feedback about what to do. Right? Excellent. And the other thing you're doing is you're letting them move. You're doing hands-on type stuff. Okay? Awesome. Thank you. Okay? Next strategy.
One of my music teachers in the elementary school is having a really difficult time with one particular class, so we implemented a tool intervention. And tools are titles that are nice.
Ah.
So they have a tool jar that's in their classroom, and it's going to start out really simple where they only have to earn a few tools before they get like the other reward. But it's a peer-to-peer driven style too. So she and I spent time modeling how to tutor each other, and now kids have to give each other tools.
Listen
throughout
to
the day,
this.
so.
Toodles.
Yeah.
That's a new word. I'm so gonna use that. So toodles, that's a great idea. Tattling, that's nice. So it's you're catching them doing something good. So it goes back to that praise, and it goes back to this is what's awesome, this is how, this is how I see so-and-so, and it's all peer driven. That's awesome. That's really great.
They love it.
That's good. So my kids go to an IB school, so an International Baccalaureate school, and they have an IB profile, learner profile. So you have to be, they want kids to be principled, which means, doing the right thing, full of integrity, curious, inquire, you got it. And so they do kind of a similar thing where they can identify their peers who've shown curiosity, or this person was a risk taker today, and they love it. They just dwell on that. It's so exciting. That's a great idea. Okay? What else?
My daughter's Montessori class, one of hers said they had like a stone jar. So there were blue stones and green stones. So if you did something, and the jar was a visual, and it kept, everybody was kind of, they were supportive of each other. So they're like, oh, well, I have a green stone is good, and a blue stone, okay, you did something that wasn't very nice, we're going to put in the blue stone when you did your work. And it really helped with accountability in the classroom. Was developmentally appropriate because the kids had a visual, it was kinetic, and it was repetitive. So you did this, like you
So
all
they're
sat
getting
down.
rewarded for on-task behavior, different things like that.
Yeah.
And that's
And
really,
then at the end of the period of time, like a month, the teacher would pull out, would randomly pull in, and if she pulled out a green stone, there'd be a reward, and more blue stones. They're like, no, we don't want blue stones because then we don't get
Gotcha.
like our timeout. And the other thing that I've done when I was working in an early childhood classroom was like a logical consequence. So little Johnny spills water. Well, even if little Johnny spills water right before recess, he has to clean it up. Okay, let's go together and get the stuff and clean this up. And what that really did is it made it a safe environment. You felt safe. Okay, I spilled water, but I'm not getting in trouble for it. Really, I'm just making it be to okay, I'm gonna clean up. And even if it is right before recess, one of us will have stayed in with him until he got that clean up, and then you can go play. It's not
Right.
okay, you did something wrong, you made a mess, well, you're not going to be able to play now, let's
Right.
made a mess, let's.
well, it's teaching them a life skill, right? Like, this is how you clean up. This is how you do this. This is how we take care of it. We all make mistakes, right? So it's empowering that. Awesome. Okay, what other strategies?
Just morning check-ins or check and connect, so that when students arrive on campus, they have a meaningful adult that they can check in with, to check on how things are going, the start of their day, possibly set a goal for themselves for the day. Just check and connect.
Check and connect. See, this is the language we're learning, right? Check and connect. I love that. So just checking in, connecting with a meaningful adult, because a lot of our kids, they run wild at night. They don't have people who are checking on them, and I'm a huge believer, my experience tells me that bad things happen at nighttime. And if we don't have anything to check in with in the morning, or anyone who cares about us to check in, then that means we're not valued, right? So it's a great idea, okay? What else?
I teach 5th through 8th special ed, and I have kinetic sand. Did anybody use kinetic sand?
Yeah.
And it's in 2 Tupperwares. And one of the girls who would never talk just started playing in the sand, and it just started to flow out. Just opening up. And then she said, we need a sandbox. So one of the kids in 8th grade is like, hey, I'm in the shop, I'll make a sandbox. So he went and made a sandbox, so we could dump both buckets in there. And when they take tests, they'll just have their hand in the bucket and then just start taking their tests. So
That's awesome. It's meeting a huge need. So as a therapist, I have parents who drop their kids off and they'll say, fix my kid, and I'll play with them, and then they're like, well, why'd I pay you to play for an hour? Right? But it's the same concept. Well, because play is the language of children, and play, they feel comfortable talking. So great idea. And also, what an investment they have now, because somebody, not you, someone built that, another student built that sandbox. That's very empowering. Okay? Other strategies.
I have kind of an informal bulletin board club, so girls that are feeling on the outs, girl drama stuff, can ask if there's a bulletin board to work on, which usually there is. Gives them something to do instead of after lunch recess,
Mm-hmm.
and it's positive and keeps their self-esteem flowing.
Love it. right? So some kids aren't ready for recess, right? That's different than taking away recess. Or some people aren't ready to go be in all the drama, or they need to be away from it, right? So you're giving them an out that's a positive out, that is not a trouble out, it's empowering, and then they get to go by and they get to enjoy it, they get to have some pride in what they've done. It's a little bit like labor, like we were talking about earlier. I'm just kidding. All right, other strategies?
Community service.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
like, are you calling probation, or?
Well, I do some of that, but if a kid's having a rough day, like I had a kid the other day that melted in the bathroom. He was a boy. He didn't want to come out. He didn't want anyone to see him crying. And I said, you know, how about if we go clean up the wood shop? Melchior could use the help. And he said, that'd be great. You know, kids are great at accomplishment, and they want to see that even when they're having a really bad time and homework may not be it for them. But doing something like sweeping the steps or just doing some kind of community service, it's, you know, that's kind of what I call it, because it's helping out the school, the community. I mean, you're doing something, you're still giving back, but it keeps them occupied. Keeping their hands moving is sometimes better than letting their brain settle down.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes just turning the brain off and focusing on something else, right?
Yeah.
So
and they still see an accomplishment. It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Know.
So my husband used to sell Matco tools, and he's not a mental health person at all, which thank God. And so he would get his inventory in. Matco tools are professional tools for auto mechanics. And my favorite thing in the whole day, at the end of the day, I would come home and I would check in all of his inventory. I loved that. And he was like, why? And I'm like, you should hear everything that's going on in my head, but I have to focus. Like, there's the number, there's the part, check, 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 check. It just takes you out of your brain. And sometimes that's what we need, is to not think about all the things that we have to think about. Great example.
Related to that same thing is like meaningful work, where students don't have to necessarily be in trouble in order to do that work, but it's built into their day. So it's just something that it's more of a leadership opportunity within the school to be check around the school what different things that need to happen or to give back.
Love that. Okay.
One thing I use, and I started it with preschool kids, but I find that it works across the continuum is, you know, obviously I have like a 30-minute session. And sometimes they don't want to be there. So I have them trace their hand, and you have 5 fingers. And on each finger, they get to go, you know, we have an X amount of choices, and we put either a symbol or write it, depending on their level, what they're going to do. And each time they finish it, they color the finger. And so they get a visual of, okay, I'm almost done, I've completed X, Y, and Z. We don't go in any order, just have to complete the hand in that time. But teachers now are using this with kids who are having a hard time with certain structures, because it gives them, again, that visual, that kinetic input, that collaborative, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done, these are my choices and your choices together. So and you always have a hand in paper, so
That's
it's
true.
not high tech, you know.
That's true. Good job. All right. Thank you. Great idea.
One other thing I used to do when I was still housed in middle school was a lunch lunch. And it was just an alternative recess kind of a thing for anybody that wanted to come in and didn't want to be out there in the rat race of recess. It was a safe place to bring your lunch in. And we would, under the radar, work on social skills without them really being super aware of it. But
Without calling it
important.
social skills?
What's that?
Without calling it social
Without calling it
skills?
social skills. So I had some really dynamic people. And it started out with like 2 kids who just wanted to hang out. Before I knew it, I had 10 plus kids waiting for me every day. Pretty awesome.
What a testament, though, to what kids need,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And we had a whiteboard system too. I had a whiteboard that was on my office door and next to my office door. So when I was going to be out, I would write out of district today. And if you really needed to see me, they could write their initials, and I would check in with them the next day. Or they could just write me something really funny when I came back, which they did pretty often.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Did you have one?
I have autistic and Asperger's alone.
Lots of
Various
stuff.
other. When I see like my one you can tell when you start to get rid of that. So we have him go down and shred the paper, because he loves, you know, he'll shred maybe 4 or 5 pieces of paper, and then he's ready to come back and do his work. My other guy likes to vacuum. I think it's that sound. So we'll have them go vacuum them.
Great ideas.
Or something, and they're good.
Yep.
Paper shredding is extremely therapeutic.
Yeah.
It is.
Excellent. Paper shredding, vacuuming. Awesome. All right, any other strategies? Sir?
I think for building trust, you know, I work in shelter care 12 to 18. Most of the kids are probation or CD or criminal activity. Is number one, I remember what it was like to be a teenager even though I'm old. And so sharing experiences that I've had and the consequences that I had to pay for them, you know, experiences, and then what I did positive to change those behaviors that I got in trouble for, builds a trust that opens a whole lot of the other avenues for different strategies, because they trust you. I find that they'll talk to me openly about a lot of their issues a lot.
Awesome. And I can't even like begin to tell you how important the power of self-disclosure is. Like self-disclosure is so huge. And of course there's limits and times and places, and there's some things you should tell and some things there aren't. And you have to be discreet around some of that. I have this little gal that comes into my office, and I see her every week. And the way we start our session is by stories. Tell me a story. Tell me a story. You gotta tell me about what you had for dinner last night. Tell me about your dogs. Tell me about your kids. Tell me about your life. Blah, blah, blah. And it's all stories. She wants to hear everything about my life. And so I try to tell her funny stories, and I tell her this is what my kids have gone through stories, and this is what I've been through stories. So I try to pick some of my best stories, and then you can tell when she's done hearing my stories and she's ready to move into her stuff. And she has some really tough stuff to talk about. And so it makes it a safer place for her when that self-disclosure is happening. So that's hugely important.
I think what helps a lot with what I do too is what you said earlier about, you don't lie to them. I'll tell them, if I'm not telling them, it's because I can't, because it's safety.
Right.
But I'm not going to lie to you. When they ask what went on the staff meeting, and if I can share it, I tell them exactly what was said.
Yeah.
And any other thing, so that again, truthful with them. Helps them deal with pressure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even about the hard stuff. Good. Okay, any other strategies you guys want to share?
Well, I also do free counseling treatment center. And so I work with teenage girls and teenage boys. But when you do like what you said, you also find out you're a real person too. You're not just this teacher or therapist. You live a real life too, and that makes them more comfortable.
Yeah.
And when they think you've lived it.
Absolutely.
I think an important thing, it's not necessarily a formal program, but just the idea of listening, of being that listening ear, because so often I think as an administrator they come in and immediately, you did this or you did that, instead of just hearing. I just want to hear your story, just being there and being present to hear what they have from their perspective, I think is really powerful. Then you can come from the other side or whatever to meet that, but just listening to what their perspective is
Absolutely.
Important.
Listening way more than talking.
I had some students lost their recess for a week, so then I got them to turn that around, and now they can earn points for the whole class to do an activity if they quit doing those behaviors that lost their recess. So now it's got a positive focus instead of a negative.
Good. And empowering for the whole class, probably. Like, we're going to do this, we're going to earn that. That's great. Good. Do you have one?
Well, just with the listening thing, like working with high school kids, for so many of these kids, all the decisions have been made for them, and so much control has been taken away from them, that I just find that if they feel validated, even if things don't necessarily go the way they want it to, they appreciate that they were listened to and that there was a conversation about what was going on, and that they felt like they had input.
Absolutely.
Rather than constantly having their life decided for them.
Right.
And no one caring.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about healthy home, unhealthy home, right? My kid can tell me no, and I'm not going to freak out. She's 2. Like, at the end of the day, I'm going to get what I want because she's 2. Like, she's going to have to do it, right? But she can say that all she wants, and I'm going to be okay with that. Unhealthy home, I'm not going to get to say much. Not very many people are going to interact with me. Some people might not even really care what I do. I'm gonna get to run and do whatever I want, but then decisions are gonna be made for me that I have no input on, right? I didn't get to choose to not have parents. I didn't get to choose for my parents to make other choices that were more important to me. I didn't get to choose to be adopted. Like sometimes that's not a choice, right? So I didn't get to choose to witness all this trauma, be sexually abused, be physically abused. Those are not my choices. So I do need some control, okay? All right, we're gonna move forward. So I love this slide because when we think about interventions, we're gonna talk about intervention. We did a great discussion after our session 1 around two tiers, right? So there's prevention interventions and there's interventions. Prevention strategies and intervention. Prevention is before the crisis occurs, right? And you guys have come up with a lot of really great ideas around that. Intervention is during the crisis. We want the crisis to end, we need it to slow down, we need it to stop, whatever that looks like. We need those strategies to regulate, to relate, and to reason. I am certain that if you sat here long enough, you would find a time in your life where you were like trying to reason with a kid in the middle of a crisis. Maybe. Right? Tell me why you did what you did. What were you thinking? Do you understand how this impacts the entire class? Do you know that your behavior is disruptive to everybody? Has anyone in there said any of that, or is that just me? Right? So the goal, I really want you to shift your thinking. The goal is to regulate. Until a kid is regulated, there is no reasoning that happens. I think I shared with you, this is the sticking point of my marriage right now. Like, it's it. I'm like, seriously, we're going down this again. Right? Because my kids are passionate and they're going to yell and scream and they're going to tell you all sorts of things you don't want to hear, and my husband's always reasoning during that. I'm like, guys, right now. And he's like, why don't you have my back? I'm like, I got your back, but not right this second. Like, the timing's off. I'll have your back as soon as she's regulated. Because I don't want them to miss the point. Like, he has a really good point, but she can't hear that when she's all worked up. I can't hear that when I'm worked up. That's human nature. So regulate. So there's several strategies that we can do for intervention to regulate. We'll get there. All right, regulate. The next piece is relate. It doesn't matter what you're saying if you don't have a relationship with this kid. Like, one of the things I struggle with most is in education is how many people get involved with a kid who don't have a relationship. Right? There might be a teacher walking by in the hallway and they're correcting the kid who's sitting out in the hallway and not have any understanding of what actually led the kid to get to the hallway, and then that just escalates the kiddo. Right? The kiddo might not have even been escalated. The kid actually had wanted to go to the hallway to regulate, and then they're probably talking to people and disrupting people. And maybe they need to be corrected, but there's got to be relationship involved. Okay? All right. We're gonna talk prevention first. And I think you guys got a lot of prevention down. Prevention's about relationship building and creating safety. All right? Being that crisis responder. Remember when we talked about in the first session, how many paramedics show up at the car accident and say, what the hell were you thinking? They don't, or they shouldn't. And they do that because they're responding to a crisis. Emotional crises are the exact same thing. You have no idea what these kids are going through every day. You might have a sense of what's happening, but you've not walked in their shoes. So it's important to listen to their story. They might be sad their dad died and not because they're molested. Two different reasons, right? They might be beside themselves because their mom didn't get up to go to work today and she's going to lose her job. And that might be their responsibility to wake mom up, but they couldn't get her up. So we really don't know what's going on until we have that relationship there. And they don't want a lecture. I have yet to find a kid who wants a lecture. How many of you are lecturers? Be true. Thank you for being honest. So here's my general rule of thumb around that. You have exactly 2 sentences before they tune out. Now that's not research driven. That's my own experience. Sometimes you only have one, so think very clearly about what you want them to hear you say, right?
Well, like our kids, when you say, you get upset after a while, you know, say, what are the rules, or, you know, whatever, they are to the point now where they'll list the rules. They, you know, but it's just out of memory, you know, they know exactly what you want to hear because they've heard it so many times, but you break it down and you know it's just because that's what they're trained to say. They can list them out, but I don't think they actually know individually what is expected of them. They're just lectured so many times day after day that that's our automatic response.
Absolutely. And so take that a step further. So let's say we have the rule, I don't know, what's a rule that you have in your classroom?
Raise your hand.
Okay. Raise your hand. How many of you have that rule? Right, we raise our hand for a lot of reasons, right? We raise our hand so we listen to other people, so we don't interrupt people, so we're respectful for people. Like, it's a universal sign if I want to speak. Anywhere you go, you raise your hand, people are going to speak that, right? If you're a kid who's never been taught that, because you've been in 7 different schools, how do you know what that means? You don't. So there are things that we think kids really do know, but they don't know. They have no idea. Now, raise your hand seems pretty simple, but when you think of all the nonverbal that goes around with that, like, when do I raise my hand? How long do I keep my hand up? What if I raise my hand and no one's calling on me? Right? Is that appropriate? You know, sometimes those things are learned in like kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, right? Hopefully those teachers have a higher window of tolerance for kids who maybe blurt out, because they're learning those systems and those rules and that culture. But if you have a kid who's been in 10 different schools from kindergarten to 3rd grade, they may have never learned that skill. Blah, blah. Okay? So think of the rules in your classroom. Think of the problems that you're having with your kiddo that you're thinking about. Do they understand the rule? Do they understand what that looks like? Across the board, the #1 rule in most classrooms is treat others the way you want to be treated. True or false? True. Golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. If I've grown up in a home that's unhealthy, I have no idea how I want to be treated. I don't even know what that concept means. That is such an abstract thought. How in the world am I going to know that I want someone to listen to me, and I want someone to care about me, and I want someone to be my friend and share with me? And I don't know that. So it's a great idea, but now we got to break down what does that look like, right? We have to really teach what that means. And then what happens is when someone breaks that rule, typically we as adults go, well, is that treating someone how you want to be treated? Is that true or false? And they're like, well, I don't know. They don't know. And we're holding them accountable for that. Right? I have my son. We joke because my son always says, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, I didn't realize how many cliches we use in all of our life, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And he went on a walk with our neighbor the other day, and he came home and he was like, Sage just asks, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I'm like, he's just curious. But through his eyes, I've learned, we say a lot of things kids don't know. Just because they speak does not mean that they know. So I think it's good to go back and reflect on what your expectations are and really make sure they understand that.
Like, a lot of people get annoyed, you know, what's that, why? And then they yell, you know, instead of, they are just trying to be curious and they don't know, but that agitates the adult, and then they get scared to ask anything, and it shuts them down, at least with a lot of our students.
That's not going to happen with anybody in this classroom, though. I guarantee it, because you all are very aware that that is a developmental stage that kids are going through. And if they're being curious with you, that means you've created a safe environment, and welcome, bring it on. Right? Okay. Being a crisis responder, does that make sense? You have to be prepared. The other piece of that is you can't become part of the crisis. And that's where that co-regulation, knowing when your buttons have been pushed, knowing when you need to take a break, tagging out, that's where that comes in. Now, I don't want you to beat yourself up if you say, I need a break from this kid. I actually want you to pat yourself on the back. Because that's you being human, right? So I think I shared with you guys that my stepmom committed suicide on Christmas Day this year. It was terrible, 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 a horrible thing. Well, in our community, we had a suicide a few weeks ago, and they called me and asked me to be a crisis responder and to do some debriefing in the community. And it was a teenager. And I just said, I can't. It's not that I don't want to, but I can't. I am not in a space where I can handle that, because I got to deal with me. Now that doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean I won't be ready to do that again in the future. But for this moment right here today, I'm not available. Emotionally, that's too much. And the last thing someone needs in crisis is for me to go in there and be a wreck right there with them. Right? It's okay for me to share emotion. It's okay for me to tear up. It's okay for all of that. But I don't need to be in my own crisis. It's okay for you to have your feelings hurt by a kid. It's okay to tell them your feelings are hurt. It's okay to express that with them, but it shouldn't make you fall apart to the point that you can't help them out. If that's happening, you gotta look at you and you gotta get some help with that. And there are some kids that will do that to you. And when you care deeply for kids, you get wounded. They do things that make you crazy. They do things that hurt your feelings. And you think, why did they do that? We have a good relationship. It's not about you, it's about them. Okay? All right. Creating safety. I want you to really think about your environment. What is your environment like for these kiddos? Look at it through their eyes. And I would even go back and ask your kids the question, no matter what age they are. What do you guys think about my classroom? They're the best reporter. I really hate that picture on the wall. It reminds me of A, B, or C. I really don't like the way the desks are set up. I love this. I don't like that. Think about the environment. Sometimes what happens is you have a light buzzing in your room that you don't even notice because you're really good at filtering that out, but kids who have sensory issues are not. And that's making them anxious. So when you ask the question or you look and you evaluate your environment, and you might even ask a few people to come in and look at it, think about the senses. What does this do to my vision? What does this do to my sound? What does it do to smell? Right? I worked in a classroom and the school had flooded, and it had that musty, moldy smell, and no one really noticed it because it'd been there for so long. And this kid was like having a hard time. That was part of the reason. Musty, moldy smell, right? Think about your senses. Where are they sitting in relation to other people? Some of us have a really wide space. Some of us need to not be next to people. So I spoke yesterday in Denver. I walked in. Here's the board with the projector. Here's the first table where they have to sit. I was like, oh, this is going to be a problem. Because I'm a mover. I get excited. I felt really bad for the people in the front row, and I told them that. But you guys have control over those environments. You can shift that, okay? That's one way to create safety. The other way to create safety is think about how you interact with kids. Are you on eye level? Do you speak looking down to them? Do you bend? With teenagers, I try to always sit and talk to them. I might even sit on the floor and talk to them. Right? Because if you're meeting the need of an infant, an internal infant, how are you going to do that? So really be thinking through safety. Okay? That scary teacher in your building, what are they doing that is not safe? Our scary teacher has a tone of voice that I can't handle. That tone of voice is mean and nasty, and it's not soft at all. Right? So I'm like, okay, well, if that's scary to me, and I know the kids are scared of that, then what do I need to be aware in myself? So take inventory. Go back to what Mr. Siegel, Dr. Siegel said on the video, right? Eye contact, tone of voice, gestures, your timing. Sometimes we speak too fast. Kids can't hear our directions. They can't hear what we're saying. Or sometimes they need us to speak a couple of times. They need us to repeat it. Make sense? Okay, this is a huge piece, and that's why I wanted to spend some time with it today, because without safety, nothing else matters. Period. End of line. When a crisis occurs, if a child does not feel safe, or a youth does not feel safe in that relationship, nothing else matters. Nothing. So this is crucial. You don't get this piece, the rest doesn't make sense. We're out.
So physical safety, I mean, you have to first.
Every emotional safety, physical safety,
Right.
all
Make
that.
sure that everything
Yep.
is right.
Yep, you've got to make sure that's right. Now, I keep in mind, you have multiple children in your classroom, right? You have lots of different needs you have to adjust to. So there are going to be kids who are super flexible and some stuff just doesn't bother them, right? There are also going to be kids who, my daughter's an example. Like if she was in a classroom where there's all this noise going on, she's going to have a total meltdown. And she cannot handle that. So her and her teacher have an agreement. They call it the take 5 method. And she looks at her and she goes, and the teacher goes, and if either one of them do that, that means she can go take 5. She can take her work out in the hallway. She can go into an environment that works for her. And they have that mutual agreement, right? But it's important that you recognize the kids in your class who are struggling, and you're looking and evaluating, is it related to the environment? Is it related to the relationship with me? The answer very well be no. It's not either one of those things. It's totally outside of your control. But I want to make sure that you're doing what you can on your part to create that safety, right? The other piece of relationship and relationship safety, the only way to build relationship safety is time. You have to put in the time. If you don't put in the time to create the safety, it doesn't happen. Right? When you guys walked in on day 1, you didn't know who I was. You'd never met me. You had no idea what I had to offer. Now you're here for day 2. I hope I've created some safety for you. That's how kids feel, right? They don't know you. They don't know what's going on with you. So you have to put time in. Okay? Kids who are really stressed and those stress response systems are kind of all over the place, the best thing you can do is relate and connect. Take everything else away and relate and connect. Just spend time. All right, and that goes into what we were just talking about, right? I call it money in the bank. You need to put money in the bank of relationship. There's lots of different ways to do that. My favorite way of doing that is to laugh with someone. I always find that the more we laugh, the more we joke, the more our relationship feels safe, right? People like to feel good. There's a whole list that you'll get when I email you this list about putting money in the bank, okay? I don't think there's anything on there. Setting boundaries that keep them safe. So I had a 16-year-old, she's a runner. She's a runner. We talked about running a little bit earlier, but she would run and run and run. And she was running away and doing really dangerous stuff. She was having sex with homeless people, and she was using drugs and alcohol, and she was meeting people she did not need to be meeting, right? And her parents set a very firm limit. And they said, we love you, we want you at our house, running cannot be your coping skill. She had to go to treatment. It was one of the hardest things they've ever said to her. We're gonna keep you safe, and you can come home. We want you to come home as soon as you can. But running cannot be on your list of coping skills. You can be mad, you can be angry, you can be all these things that you feel with us, and we can handle that. We have the tools to handle that. You cannot run. Now, that's a huge limit to set when you're a parent. And you're putting a line in the sand, right? You cannot live in this home if you run away. They did not feel good about that. But she heard that, and as she went through treatment, she's like, this was a situation that I ran again. I can't be running. I want to go home. I want to be with my family. Okay, what else could have I done? What's another skill that I can have? I'm happy to say she hasn't run for about 6 months, and she's living at home again. So that's great, right? But her stress response system, she was a flighter. Not a fighter, she was a flighter. Okay? Hugging. How many of you hug your kids? Thank you for saying that with pride. I know there's all sorts of laws and legislation and rules and that kind of stuff that sometimes we can't do those things, but finding a way to do healthy touch is really, really important, right? So I have this grandpa I work with, this is what he does. His hugs are like 2s, not 5s, because he's not really a hugger, right? I had a teacher I worked with, they were elbowers. Every kid that came into his class, they did elbows, because he wasn't really a hugger. But he got that. Like, he like, oh, these kids need touch. So there's a million ways to do that. I had another one that was like that. It just, you know, tapped feet. So it's important to be creative around that, okay? Keeping in mind that if you touch a kid you don't have safety with, a relationship with, it's not gonna work. So it does not work for every kid. So what I always caution myself about when I teach is that I'm giving you all these ideas, and there will be somebody out here that will be like, all right, must hug. Hug. Uh-oh, it didn't work. Must do this. No, I'm not saying this is a blueprint for all children. I'm saying these are ideas and concepts that you have to implement, okay? All right, we've talked about somatosensory breaks. Last session we talked about not all sensory breaks are appropriate for all children. You've got to know what their senses are. But I will say play is appropriate for all people. So figure out a way to play with your kids. Even if you start your day with 10 minutes of play in some way in the class, right? So I did that when I did student teaching. Every kid was responsible for a day, right? We assigned the day, and they had to bring in their favorite quote or their favorite music, they had to bring in something that shared something about them. They could bring in their favorite song, and we played at the beginning. We all danced. I had seniors, and it was psychology, so it was all good. It's all warm and fuzzy, right? They played their favorite song. We got to listen to music. We got to get up and move around. We got to dance, and then we got to work. And if we had enough time at the end of the day, we went back and we got to listen to that song again. They loved that for a couple reasons. And I had no rules about what music they brought in. Some people get a little bit twitchy when people want to play Eminem and that kind of stuff. But there's a reason these kids like this music. You think about the music you like and what really speaks to you, and it's usually related to some sort of event that has occurred in your life, or it makes you feel a certain way, right? That's why I don't limit people on their music choices. Because these kids who've been through really crappy things are gonna listen to music that relates to them going through really crappy things. And it's hardcore stuff. Is it appropriate? Not always, but most of these kids have been through stuff that's not appropriate. And music is a very safe way for them to express that, right? What do you guys think about that? How many of you guys use music in your class? Yeah, keep using it, right? How many of you let kids have iPods or MP3s? Oh, okay. What are some other things you do to play together?
I used with high school kids, I realized that this population of kids, I was talking about things, I make a reference to like the game of life. We have a little car of people, they look at me like, what are you talking about? I realized these kids had no idea what people are looking for. And so I just would pick a day, and have game day, and I taught them how to play all these board games that I grew up playing, because we never did that together, and that was something they didn't have. And at the end of the year, I have kids evaluate me, and that was one thing that they all immediately like. They all love playing games.
Right.
And we sat and talked, and we worked through things as we were, getting paid, but play games and everything. But
so when stuff like that happens, right? What I say is you're giving them an experience they've never had, a developmental experience that's really important. When you think about, so let's talk about Candyland for a second, right? Candyland is like the crux of development for me. I can tell where a kid is developmentally based on how they play Candyland, right? And so you have Candyland, and I play fast Candyland because I've got to get through a lot of stuff in a quick time. So we split the deck up and we go as fast as we can. Some kids have never seen it, they've never played it, they don't know what it means, and they could be 15. And when you think about a kiddo who's never played Candyland who's 15, now I'm not saying all people have to play Candyland, I'm not saying that. But when you think about kids who are 15 and 16 have never really played board games, or they've never been with their family having those moments, what are they robbed of?
Relationship.
relationship, experiences, right? Right now we're learning how to play cribbage for lots of reasons. Like that's what we grew up playing in my house. And I also want our kids to get better at math. So I'm just sneaking that in there a little bit, right? So that's a game that I can't imagine not sharing with my kids. But there are lots of kids out there who are not going to have some of those traditions and routines, right? That little kids play. Now, when you teach a little kid to play Candyland, you do not play by the rules when they're little. They make up all the rules, and we play by that because that's cute, and we want them to be in control. Many kids miss that. Then they get older and you're kind of like, all right, I guess I learn about rules. We got to teach you to take turns and we got to share and you can't always be in charge and you can't just go to the little ice cream person, you know, Queen Frosty or whatever. You have to get the card. And that's where that learning about how to interact with others comes into play. So game day, great idea, right? Now, can you take educational time to play a game? Sometimes. Can you during testing week? Do we all need it more during testing week? So figure out ways to have that play incorporated. That is by far one of the best prevention strategies you're going to have. And don't do play unless you're ready to play. Empathy. This goes back to the listening piece. We've talked about this, but it's one of those things that if you don't give empathy and let them know they've been heard, you can't move forward. So kids in crisis, this is an intervention strategy, right? Kids in crisis. All right, I need a volunteer. Who would like to volunteer to be on camera for the whole entire state of Montana to see? No pressure. Bring it on, thank you. It's important to disclose about how this is going to go. Yeah. Rob's going to make you look good anyway, so don't worry about it. Brownie points. Yep. Awesome. I know. All right. Okay. So I'm in crisis. I'm going to be in crisis. You're going to be prevention and intervention strategy. Your strategy is empathy. We'll say who do you work with? What kids do you have?
I have 2nd grade through 4th, and then I have middle school.
Okay, probably I have to be like a 2nd, 3rd grader, but my words could be any age.
Okay.
You will see that they will apply. You've all said these words, okay? I want you to just do empathy. And remember, you're regulating me, okay?
Okay.
You can't get this wrong. Don't feel bad.
Okay. I'm like, okay.
You can't get this wrong. And thank you for being a volunteer. All right. So the situation is that I have stolen something, and you're calling me on that.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say I stole a pen from somebody, okay? And you found it.
Okay.
And you're gonna call me on it.
All right. Is it your pen?
Yeah, thank you, I found it.
Where did you
Thank
find
you.
that?
I just found it around.
Oh, so do you think that could belong to somebody else? So it's not for sure yours?
Are you saying I'm lying?
I'm not saying you're lying, but I'm just saying it might be somebody else's.
You don't
Maybe we
understand.
could-
No, I found it.
Where'd you find it?
I just found it. Maybe out at recess.
Do you want to come show me where you found it? Maybe
Nope.
we could go from there? No?
You're calling me a liar. Why are you calling me a liar?
I'm not calling you a liar, but I think we need to talk about it a
Nope.
little more.
Mm-mm. Nope, you're calling me a liar.
What do you think a liar is?
Well, you're telling me you don't believe me.
I did not say that.
Well, you asked if I could have found it somewhere else or it could have been somebody else's.
Well, it's possible if it's nobody's pen, right?
It's my pen.
But you found it. So whose was it?
Well, I found it, so now it's my pen.
Which is true. That's the law by nature. But what if somebody really misses this pen? Have you ever had something that you missed before?
Okay, so pause right there. Okay, so where did she go?
Lecture.
She went to reasoning, right? Which is okay. All good points. But am I ready to reason yet? No. And that's because I'm a hard client.
Yeah.
Right? That all those tools, I know. So thank you. You did perfect. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause. We haven't done any 1 second parties today. We need to give her a 1 second party. I totally forgot. All right, ready? Woo! All right, thank you. So do you see what happens though? Like how many of you have had an interaction like that? Anybody? Okay. Because we as adults are trying to get them to see our side. So what should we do instead? What does the opposite look like? So say, sounds like you need a pen. Oh, okay, well go ahead and keep using the pen for right now, right? And then you say, let me know when you're ready to talk about it. Or I understand you think I'm calling you a liar. So empathy is about repeating what you hear until they're in a place where they're regulated and ready to move forward. So you just repeat it, right? So you did a great job of moving into reasoning, which is going to be appropriate once I'm regulated. Because I want to hear that lesson. But I really need you to know that I needed the pen and I'm not a liar. I need to know that you know that I'm not a liar. And kids will get stuck on that, won't they? And you will get stuck on the other side. And then we're not making any movement. And that's because we're not regulated. So the way to diffuse that is A, just to listen, right? Tell me what happened. I went to the playground, I picked up the pen, blah, 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 blah. Which the kid may or may not be ready to share with you. Or if they keep saying things like, you're calling me a liar? What do you think? I'm a liar? Which kids will do, then you say, so you think I'm calling you a liar? And I get that. And you don't argue with them. You don't say, no, I'm not calling you a liar. Because that's also reasoning. They're not ready for that. Less is more. Less talking. Right? So sometimes I'll say, this is something I want to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about it a little bit later. But what you've done is you've introduced the, hey, I know you stole the pen. We're going to have a conversation about it. And now I'm walking away. And I'm giving you time to adjust. How many of us need time to adjust? You can't have what you want. Too bad, so sad. Right? I always think about buying a house. If you've been through the buying a house process, there's a lot of opportunities to learn how to adjust. I need one more piece of paper. I need one more piece. Are you kidding me? I've given you that paper 17 times. How many more papers do you need? Oh, you want to run my credit again? We've run that 17. Oh, you need more money. Okay, yeah, one more clip, right? Lots of times to adjust. It's the same thing for kids. And you could pick that battle very easily, right? We could have gone down this road where I'm stuck in my truth of figuring out who the pen is, and you're stuck in the truth of I'm not the liar, and we're never going to get anywhere. At the end of the day, what does that kid want to feel? Heard, validated, respected. Sometimes you have to dip your toe in the water, let them know you're going to call them on their stuff, and give them a little bit of time to figure that out. You can't be so set in dealing with it right in that moment because it's going to escalate. Or maybe the conversation will start out really nice. Yeah, I did take the pen. You're right. I stole it. And you might move into reasoning, right? Because we have a relationship. Like, I care about you. I want to know more about what's going on. That's talking about that relationship piece. I want to know what's going on that you would steal a pen. Because you know you can ask any time for a pen. We will give you a pen. It's not a big deal. Well, that might be the point where they become escalated. Because now you might be tapping into that trauma. Well, you know, today when I woke up, I was leaving the house and I couldn't get all my stuff and I left it at home and I didn't want to disappoint you. Kids don't generally say all that, but that's all the stuff they're feeling. So then you say, when you're ready to talk about that, let me know. Or you might even say, we don't have to talk about it. I just want you to know I care about you. You can come talk to me about it anytime. Does that make sense? We always have to evaluate what are the battles are we going to pick. Is it worth picking the battle over a pen? Some kids it might be, right? If they steal constantly, it's creating all sorts of problems. But if it's a kid who is really under a lot of stress, there might have been a whole different reason for that. Does that make sense? Aggression is another thing. We're going to talk a little bit about aggression. Aggression is the scariest thing to deal with, right? How many of you have had kids who are super aggressive? What'd you do? Walked on eggshells, right? I don't want to hold him accountable because he might explode. And I generally say he, it's not always a he. But a lot of times it is. How many of you guys have female aggressive kids? How many of you had males? Okay. So different reasons, right? So my suggestions around aggressive kids are a couple. One, you need to meet as a team to decide how you're going to handle that. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Because the worst thing that can happen with a kid who's aggressive, a kid who is aggressive is scared. That's what's going on. They are frightened and they are scared. And usually what happens with kids who are aggressive is once the intervention starts, many people are involved. And not everybody knows what's going on. And not everybody has a relationship with that kid. Right? So it's twofold. There's prevention, where you're putting money in the bank, you're building relationship, you're building relationship. You're also having conversations with how do we handle this as a team? What do we do about this? How do we connect? If this kid starts to escalate, who's gonna be in charge? Who's gonna zip their mouth and just be supportive? Because we've also had other people, right, who are gonna come in and they're gonna really help us out and they're gonna deal with it. And you're like, you've just undone everything we're doing is actually de-escalating quite a bit, right? So that's where that conversation needs to be happening. It's not necessarily about the dynamics of the team, it's about the kid, and it's not about you can't do this or you can't do it. It's who has the best relationship with this kid. That's who needs to be talking to the child, period. No one else should be talking. Because the more we talk, the more scared kids get. Because when talking is cortex stuff, right? Okay, then the intervention happens. For whatever reason, kid flies off the handle. My question is he flying off the handle for the same reason every time? Is there a pattern? That's always a good question to ask. Because if there is a pattern, that's awesome and we can deal with that. Okay? Is this kid blown out of the same class every day? Because sometimes kids don't like a certain teacher. Now, I'm all about the life lessons of sometimes you got to deal with difficult people. Sometimes you need to be in a class where maybe you don't get along with that teacher. But the reality is some of these kids' stress systems, that is not the battle we want to pick right now. So maybe just moving them to a different class is a solution. And that's not a failure. That's meeting a kid's needs. And when we meet a kid's needs, how can we be wrong? Right? When you have a kid who's grown up with lots of abuse and neglect, they might be triggered by some people. They might not even know why they're triggered by those people. But if it's the same time, same person every single day, there's probably some trauma history that's triggering them. And we got to address that. Maybe we just don't expose them to that. Or maybe we really work on the person who's triggering them, unintentionally usually, to build the relationship and create safety. And that's an opportunity for reparative experiences. Okay? So let's say it's just completely unpredictable. Because how many of you have completely unpredictable aggression? You have no idea what's going on. And then you all panic. Right? I panic when unpredictable aggression happens. Then it's around containing the crisis. So, do you need to remove other kids? Get them out of the classroom? Does the kid need to be out of the classroom? I try to prevent hands-on as much as possible. As much as possible. But I also know that hands-on have to happen sometimes, right? Because you want to keep a kid safe. But if you know this kid is regularly popping, what you need to do is have a conversation with them outside of the crisis about what they can expect. I've even gone so far as to say, when you're this violent, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to show you when you're not in crisis, what that looks like. We're going to put you in a basket hold, or we're going to have someone escort you, or whatever that looks like, whatever your training is. Now, keep in mind, hands-on is last resort stuff. But there are some kids who are super violent, right? The last thing you need is someone who comes in and takes them down, who has no relationship, and the kid is not predictable. I've gone as far as to make a visual list of this is what happens. Because most of the time with aggressive kids, it's not just one time. It's repeated, right? So we know that when you do this, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And we want to stop you before we get to this happening. Right? So the question is, it's sitting them, when they're regulated, it's sitting with them and saying, this is the process. After that experience happens, if it ends up in a hold, whatever it takes for them to get to a place where they're a little bit more regulated, there always has to be repair. And that's the part we miss. 90% of the time, we don't go back and talk it through with the kid. What you'll find is if you go through that process with a kiddo, because sometimes what happens, sometimes kids escalate to the point where they need touched, and you have to touch them because they need touch. Now that's a pretty warped way of walking through the world, right? But when you grow up in a world where you see all of that happen, so my blueprint is people who love each other hit each other. Because I grew up in a domestic violence home. Like if I'm the kid who's witnessing that, then what am I going to do at school? I love my teacher. I care about my teacher. I don't know how to necessarily ask for hugs from my teacher. I'm going to escalate so that my teacher has to hold me. Does that shift it for you? Makes it different, right? So, yeah.
Can you talk a little of your strategies of the repair that you do that?
Absolutely. So repairing is about going in and really doing like a debriefing. Now, in my ideal world, which I know education systems are not always ideal, everyone who's involved in that process would be part of the repair. So any staff who was called on for crisis intervention, the child and the adults would all be involved in that process. And it wouldn't be a scary process for a kid, right? That can be a very intimidating process. So it might just start with the teacher and the kiddo, and the teacher coming up and saying, and you need to talk about you. You need to talk about you. Holy cow, I was really scared when you hit me, when you threw the computer, when you pushed over that desk. That really scared me because I didn't want you to hurt yourself. I didn't want other kids to get hurt. I wonder how you're feeling about that. Think of any time in your life when someone's repaired something with you. Did they just walk up and say, when they just say, I'm sorry, and you say, I'm sorry, was life all better? I mean, seriously. We tell people to do that all the time. It doesn't work that way. The repair comes when you hear their side and they hear my side. So from the kid's perspective, wow, you're saying I could really use some help understanding what was going on with you. And the kid's like, well, you did this and you did that and you did this. It might not be anything you did. It might be a total lie. They might have misinterpreted everything that happened. This is not a time to argue. This is a time to hear the perception, right? Well, when you came in today, it looked like you were all crabby and mad, so I just thought we'd get this over with. Does that happen? Right? Wow, you interpret me as crabby and mad? I didn't even know that. Maybe you should have said, hey, Mrs. Smith, are you crabby and mad today? Oh, I didn't know I could ask you how you feel. Right? So that's what that reparative conversation's about. It's not, and keeping in mind, like some kids can't do that yet. So you might make some guesses. For little guys, I make a lot of guesses. I'm kind of wondering, like when I had to put hands on you, if you felt kind of scared of that. Yeah, I hate that. I really don't want to do that ever again. What are some things we can do? You know, can you give me a thumbs down and I'll know that you need a break? And you come up with some ideas. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Are there any parts of that are confusing? We're human. It doesn't always go exactly like I'm talking. Right? And a reparative conversation might not happen the same day that the occurrence happened. You might need some time, and they might need some time. But it has to happen. Right? I'm not a big fan of, I'm sorry, move on. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're setting a really strong limit with a kid, and you're saying, everyone's going to be safe in this school. Everyone's going to be safe in this classroom. That means you're going to be safe, and I'm going to be safe. And when we put hands on kids, we send different messages. Because these kids, sometimes the hands that have been put on them have not been safe hands. So it's important that we have a bigger conversation around what that looks like. All right, did we nail that, Kaufman? All good? Okay. All right, we talked about that. Treatment team. So I recognize that you all are pioneers, right? You're gonna go back to your schools and you're gonna try doing some of these things, and some people have been doing this for 20 or 40 years and they're never gonna change, right? I recognize that. But I think that when you start to just shift and you start to change and your actions look differently, then you are showing them that the kids that you're connecting with are making progress. It's also important to be talking in your treatment teams about stuff. One of the reasons we started today about blueprints is because you have to have your own self-awareness. If you have good leadership, your leadership, you should be having these conversations around awareness. What do we bring to the table, right? So maybe I know I'm a very involved and intrusive person. I know that about myself. If I see a crisis, I want to get in there and I want to help out. That is not always helpful. And I've made that mistake multiple times. And I need my team to be able to tell me, Stacy, that's not helpful. I don't need that from you. What I need is for you to zip your mouth and just be supportive, right? So we also need to be creating safety and trust within our relationships, our coworkers. They need to see that because we're also modeling relationships for our kids. So if you have a problem and you know how to problem solve it and you can model that with your colleagues for your children that are working, then you're giving them another example of how that looks, right? So I'm a big believer that parents should disagree in front of their kids in a respectful way. Because if you don't grow up ever looking at people disagreeing, how do you know how to disagree with someone else? I feel the same way about education systems. You cannot tell me you go to school and you agree 100% with everything that happens, right? I'm a little bit wild and crazy about park testing right now. I have a lot of opinions about it. I disagree with the principal, big time. She knows it. It's okay. We can do that respectfully. And we can problem solve, and we can get to that place. And we're doing that in front of our kids. Okay? You're modeling. These kids may have never seen this in action, and it's a great skill to have. Is it good to be able to disagree with people in a healthy way? Yeah. Have any of you ever left a meeting and you've been really mad? No one? All right. Yeah, thank you for being honest. All right, having fun. Have we tackled that enough? If you're not having fun in your job, that's your problem. You need to be having fun. You need to be creative in figuring out how to make the content that you're teaching fun and exciting. Because if you're not having fun, your kids are definitely not having fun. All right, we're gonna take a brain break. We have 1 hour left. Are we doing good? All right, brain break, everybody up. The part where you roll your eyes. Stretch. Give yourself a hug. Count to 10. And then do some march. You guys feel that? All right. We're going to take 5 minutes. And by 5 minutes, I mean 4.5.